Hello, welcome to Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared.
I'm Kevin Lee, President and CEO of Mid-America Transplant, and we are honored to sponsor this episode of Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared. At Mid-America Transplant, we have the privilege of working with families across southern Missouri and northeast Arkansas who make the heroic decision to donate their loved ones' organs or tissues. While donation often brings families comfort, they are still heartbroken by their loss. We are driven by compassion for these families and continue to walk with them through their grief journey. Mid-America Transplant provides several programs to help families memorialize their loved one, but we believe that some of the best support can be provided by a grief center. We are proud to work with the Center for Good Grief and appreciate everything they are doing in the region to bring healing to people who are coping with loss. Mid-America Transplant is inspired by life and by the donor families who give transplant patients a second chance at life. For more information about being a donor, visit sayyesgivelife.org.
Today we're going to focus on some practical tips for parents and caregivers on how to help children cope with sudden grief burst. So joining me today is one of my incredible colleagues, Barbara. And Barbara, I'm just so grateful that you're here today on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So we wanted to talk about grief burst. Now, this is a topic we've addressed on our podcast several times, but we thought it was important to come back to this episode. We really want to focus on when children and adolescents experience a grief burst and how we can help the adults in the family, the supportive adults, the parents, the guardians, support the child and teen through a grief burst, because there's sometimes conflict or conflictual feelings that will come about. Like, is this grief burst real and genuine, or are they using this to get attention and those kinds of things? Are they using their grief to get out of a chore? So that's something we hear a lot from the adults that we work with who are parenting grieving children. So before we even get into all of that and how to, and again, the goal is to really support the adults who are supporting grieving children. Let's just start with what a grief burst is. Barbara, how do you explain that to people?
Well, I just explain it as it's just a sudden, intense feelings of grief that happen unexpectedly. And it could be a response to a memory, a smell, or song, or situation. And the thing about it, it comes so unexpectedly, and it can be so overwhelming, and it just catches people off guard. And it catches adults off guard, but especially with children and adolescents.
Yeah, it's like things are just going along perfectly, everything's fine, and then all of a sudden, just out of the clear blue, and it's hard to see a child that you love hurting. And we know that if a child is grieving in the family, then the adults are grieving as well. So a lot of times what we hear is their sudden intense reaction then triggers the adult's reaction. And then you can see how this can become a spiral and things can get out of control, meaning, maybe I'm trying to support the child the way that is helpful to me, but it's not helpful for the child. So that's really what we wanted to cover today is what are grief bursts, how do they show up, and then how can we help support children when they're experiencing a grief burst?
Yeah, because the grief bursts don't always occur when you're the most patient and just not having anything to do. As a parent or guardian, you're probably very busy, and then this happens, and you're like, stressed already, so it is very hard.
Yeah, a lot of times they happen maybe when we're in public or right before bed, and that's where the confusion I think comes in for adults is, well, they're just doing this now because they don't want to go to bed or they don't want to do this chore that I've asked them to do. And so, yeah, they're not predictable, they're not planned, they don't come at convenient times. Yeah,
it's true.
So let's just start with just kind of giving some basic things that can help caregivers when a grief burst is occurring. And I think one thing that I say the most, and this is hard to remember, I know a lot of guardians and caregivers who've almost made this a mantra, is that it is not our job to rescue grieving children from these intense and hard feelings. We want to, we love them, it is hard to see it, we want to make them better. But that is not a realistic job for us. Just like we have to experience and express our grief, children and teens need to express and experience theirs. And they're going to, as we've talked about in this podcast so many times, for the rest of their lives. And we know they can do that in a healthy way. So I think the first thing is you have to remind yourself, as much as you want, it's not your job to rescue them.
Yeah, I think that's just one of the most important things, because the child will pick up on if you're not allowing them to express themselves. And sometimes that can mean they just keep it all to themselves. And you don't want that. You want them to be able to express their feelings in a healthy way.
Absolutely. And I would encourage you, if you're listening to this podcast, think about when you are having feelings of grief and you're expressing it. As adults, I can tell you, I certainly don't want when people immediately swoop in with some sort of answer to make it all better and make me stop and put me back together. That's not what I'm seeking. And it's the same for kids. So you're right, Barbara. That's another way of just reinforcing that you're not a good person to grieve with, because you're kind of shutting them down or rescuing them. So let's just talk about basic things that caregivers and family members can do when a child starts to experience a grief burst.
Well, I think, like we said, just as the parent or guardian, you have to take a minute, stop what you're doing, sort of catch your breath and be calm as you approach the child, because they're going to pick up on your emotions. So I think one of the best things is just take a minute before you respond. You don't have to respond immediately.
Absolutely. Just that moment of just stopping, breathing, gathering yourself, maybe saying that mantra. Then I think, depending on the child, and you'll usually know, or they'll show you, kind of moving closer to them. Again, we don't have the answers. So there's not some verbal sentence that we can say that's going to fix everything. So I think coming with some compassion with our body, moving close to them, sitting with them, maybe starting with putting a hand on their shoulder or their arm, just kind of gauging that physical presence, letting them know that you are physically there. That's a great cue to them, is that I'm not alone. And from that physical standpoint, and not just being filled with words.
Yeah, and you'll know if they don't want to be touched at a certain time, if it's just too much stimulation, then just be close, stay close to them. Or, just wait till they're calmer and then maybe ask them, is it okay if I give you a hug?
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes, like you said, sometimes you'll know, they'll give you the sign that they don't want that physical presence right now. And it's okay to say, I see that you want some time, but I'm going to be right outside the door. So I think as caregivers, we have to remember not to take a lot of these things personally. We need to allow them to have, this reaction and this expression, and say, I see this, but I love you, and I'm going to be right here. I'm going to be close by. I'm going to come back in 3 minutes and check on you. I'm going to come back, in 5 minutes and check on you. And just then you start again with moving close to them, sort of gauging that reaction and seeing if they're now ready kind of for that physical presence for support. Yeah.
And I think just remembering, as a parent or a guardian, you're grieving too. So sometimes you lack that confidence of, I can wait. I don't have to respond immediately, and knowing that it's okay not to have immediate response, and you don't always have the answers.
And that's a great point. That's the whole reason we're doing this episode, is because all of us, no matter our age, one thing that, I think that we can say 100% is that when you're grieving, your self-esteem is attacked. So your self-esteem as a parent, and now all of a sudden thinking, I don't know what to do with my child. This is how I used to comfort them. It's not working now. You're so worried about your own intense emotions. So that's a great point, Barbara, is really the reason we're doing this. So I want to go back to what you said, and if we want to kind of walk our listeners through kind of 5 steps, but it's okay if you don't have them all memorized in this, but it's kind of the way when we're teaching caregivers about how to respond to these grief bursts, we kind of look at 5 different steps, for lack of a better word. So, and you said the first one already is remember that pause button. If a grief burst is happening in front of you, take a minute, pause, breathe, allow the child, allow them to express. I think something that's also important to remember in there, and I know that I've had to really work on this, is dropping your own agenda, especially if you feel like they're using this to get away with something, and just say, okay, even if that is, but right now something's happening, let me stop, let me just consider that this is truly a grief burst and breathe. Breathe yourself so that then you can go to the next step to help them.
Yes. And then I think, like you said before, remembering the job is not to rescue them, but to support their feelings, whatever the feelings. It could be they're angry or they're just upset, just whatever the emotion is, just sort of let them have that time. And if you come if the child's angry and having a meltdown and you come in angry and upset, it's just going to escalate. It's going to upset the child more. So just trying to remember you're not there to rescue them. You're just want to be there as a support.
And we say this all the time, as caregivers and parents in a family, we're teaching children so many things. We're role modeling so many things. And so this is another thing that you're role modeling is how to pause when these intense feelings happen, how to listen, how to observe, and how to respond a little slower. And that can be really helpful to them. Yeah. I think then it's also really important to listen and acknowledge what the child is expressing. So a lot of times children need us to help name the feeling. We may say it looks like you're feeling really angry right now, and see if they will say, yes, that's what I am. Or just stay close by like we talked about. But again, listening and acknowledging back, sometimes we call that reflecting back. Reflect back what you see. If they're crying I see how hard you're crying, and just reflect that back and then stop. You don't, again, have to keep going with sentences, but just let them know I'm seeing what's happening, I'm hearing you, and I'm saying that back to you that I'm here with you.
And just, you could just say, I don't really understand what's going on with you right now, but I just want to listen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that takes a lot of patience. So again, that comes back to, as the caregiver, really leaning into maybe all of the patience you have. And again, you're grieving as well, caregivers in the family, and you may not have a lot of patience. And sometimes we have to really just summons all the patience that we might have to really create the safe environment for the child. And again, that may be another mantra that you have to say to yourself, like, I don't really have the energy for this right now, but my presence is needed. I need to be here. I need to listen. But this is really hard for me. Because again, like you said, if you come in escalated when they're escalated, the only place that's going to go is escalated higher. Yeah.
And sometimes, too, out of a good place, sometimes parents will want to bribe the child to get them away from those feelings. But you just have to remember the important thing is to support the feeling, not try to get them away from the feeling.
Right. And another thing with that, like with the bribing, is sometimes we want to just immediately jump in and teach them. Again, that kind of goes in line with the rescuing, but teaching them a coping skill, or, maybe if you just came back from counseling and you learned a coping skill that's very helpful, you want to jump into that role. And again, when they're escalated like that, it's not the time. It's not the time to teach them. Teaching is important. That's what we said just a few minutes ago, that we are the role models on so many things, but we have to wait until they've calmed down, till they're able to hear it and receive it. And that's a really important step to remember. And sometimes that can be a few minutes. It might be a few hours. It might be the next day. And so we're going to talk in just a minute about some practical things that you can do and say when your child is having a grief burst, so that you can sort of determine, is this the time that I teach, or is this the time that I wait?
And two, just being aware of your own emotions where you are, and if you need a minute more after the outburst to sort of calm down so that you can get your thoughts together, that's another thing to think about.
Yeah, that's a great point, because sometimes the child may be calm, because oftentimes they get calmer before we do. They may be calm in just a few minutes, and you are totally just out of whack now because you were fine, and then all of a sudden this happened, and then they're fine and you're not fine, and you're like, what just happened in here? So it may be that you, as the caregiver, needs to wait until the next day and say, I'd like to go back and talk about yesterday, and that's fine. Again, not everything has to be dealt with in that moment. We really need to ask ourselves, am I in the right place, and are they in the right place? And that what that means is emotionally, how escalated are we, and those kinds of things. Yeah.
And the same kind of thing, if the child was in the middle of doing something, you could always ask them, do you need 5 minutes? Do you need a few minutes before you get back to that task? Or what do you need right now?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the best questions that we can ask. So we're going to talk about just some really, really practical things because, again, our families, this is something we talk about so much at the Baptist Centers for Good Grief, about supportive messages. So when kids are too overwhelmed to hear our words, or they're just resistant because they're overwhelmed, and we say, which we said a minute ago, I'm going to be close by, and when you're ready, I'm here. But what are some other things that we can say that are just really practical and easy?
Well, I think just saying, I'm so glad you told me how you were feeling. Or just saying, I'm here no matter what, no matter how you're feeling, I'm here.
I love that. And we said a minute ago, reflecting back what you see. You're feeling very, and then put in the word of the feeling that you see. Angry, sad, confused, frustrated. Again, that helps children sometimes to hear those feelings because based on their age, they may not have all of the language for those feelings. And it helps them understand that, okay, that's what's happening to me. Because a lot of times, if they don't have the word and they have these intense feelings, it gets really, really scary for them. So again, that role model of us helping them know what's happening.
Yes, because I have a lot of adults that say, what just happened? I don't know. Let me describe this. And they don't even know what's happened. So I think it is important to help the child understand what's going on and that is a normal part of grief to have these outbursts from time to time and help them know what to do.
Absolutely. And that leads to, saying to children sometimes that these feelings are okay. Again, if they've never experienced these intense emotions before, they don't know if it's okay. So again, they need us to help them know it is okay. It's normal to have these feelings. I say this all the time, that the first thing that we can do to help grieving children is to help them know that they're grieving. They've not grieved before. So this is something actually called grief. Do you know what grief is? And I've seen so many kids over the year like, oh, that's what's happening to me. That's what I'm experiencing. And the relief, and I'm sure you've seen that too, Barbara, that just washes over them because now they have a word to put with this. And so helping them know that this is normal. Tell them you just had a grief burst. Do you know what a grief burst is? Because they don't like that they got so dysregulated or so escalated. And so helping them know that's what happened can help them feel like, okay, if I know what it is, then maybe I can know what to do next time it happens.
Yeah, and I think just when you do that, education is the important thing.
Yes.
Because you don't want to do it when they're still upset.
Yes.
Because they won't hear you. You want to wait till they can hear because that is important stuff for them to know.
Yes. So again, waiting till the child is calm, deciding if this is the time to teach a coping skill or would it be better to wait until another time. And so you said this a minute ago, it's important to say to them, what do you need now? Or is there something that I can do to help you right now? And then that's where, as caregivers, we have to be quiet because they don't know immediately. They need a minute to think and to see what they come up with. And that also helps is this a teaching moment? Is this a supportive moment?
And sometimes just giving them a choice. Just if they can't come up with what they need, you can say, do you need 5 minutes or are you ready to talk now? Just giving them sort of control and choices.
And that leads into when caregivers are very frustrated because, as we said in the beginning, a lot of times these grief bursts do not happen at convenient times. It may happen right before you ask them to unload the dishwasher or homework or, going to bed. I had a child years ago who had a grief burst every week. It was like clockwork on Monday because that was the day that the trash cans had to go down. And so Mom would say to him, I need you to take the trash cans down. And she was getting frustrated that every Monday she was having to remind him, this is your chore, take the trash cans. Well, it became his chore when Dad died because it was Dad's chore. And so he had a grief burst like clockwork every Monday when she lectured him. He went outside. He had to take the trash cans down. And then she got upset because he would stay outside forever playing basketball. Well, that was part of the routine. Dad took the trash cans down. They met outside. They would shoot hoops for 5 or 10 minutes. And Mom just didn't know that. And that came out in counseling because she told me before I saw him that day, you've got to help him with the trash. And I was like, oh goodness, I think this is bigger than the trash. And when we finally got to the root of it, that's what it was. It was every time she brought it up, for him, it was the reminder, my dad has died. Now, of course, he knew that every other minute of the week, but this was a special time just for them because he had sisters, and this was just a special time for he and Dad. They stayed outside about 5 minutes, like I said, just shot some baskets, just chit-chatted, and now he didn't have that. And so that was his grief burst. And so Mom's perspective, he's trying to not do this chore. She's stressed because somebody has to absorb Dad's chores. And so they were fighting every week. And then when that came out in counseling, guess what? I didn't tell him that you don't have to do the trash anymore. But once we understood what it was about, and he said, the trash has to go out. I know it does. But what he wanted was some understanding. What he wanted was, and we worked on this in counseling, was, dropping the lecture. And he admitted, yeah, I need to take some responsibility. On Mondays, I need to do this. But Mom, I want you to know how hard it is. And so what we did is she actually started going outside. And she's like, I'm terrible at basketball. And he knew that. He's like, that's fine, but just be with me for a minute. Just be with just me, not my siblings, just me. And so, again, the trigger was there, but it led to a fight every week. And it took really, kind of looking into it and see what was going on there.
Yeah, because if you never explored those feelings or what was behind those feelings, she would have never known what was going on, and he wouldn't have had a way to express that.
I don't know about examples you might have, but I know another one is big at bedtime. And a lot of times just providing some support and education to caregivers that a lot of times kids, like adults, stay busy, busy, busy all day. They avoid. And then all of a sudden at bedtime, when you get in that bed and it's quiet, your brain says, oh, yay, you're going to let me think about this grief for a minute. And then all of a sudden the child is rebelling and not wanting to be in bed. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes a fight about go to bed. And again, we're not recommending here that children stay up till midnight and do whatever they want, but understanding that that's the way grief works and looking for other outlets. We talk about dosing a lot on this podcast, so helping a child learn how to dose so that the grief doesn't become so loud at bedtime.
Yeah. But sometimes it happens in public, which I think is almost harder.
Yes.
Because you're worried about are they judging me that I can't control my child and what's going on? So I think just trying not to, I've had parents say it's just so hard not to want to just snatch them up and get them in a private place. But sometimes you just have to do the same thing. You have to just breathe, take a minute, and just sort of do the things that we've said, even though you might be in a store, be in the grocery store. Same kind of thing applies.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. We needed to talk about that public. I heard a child once, they were in a grocery store and another child was going, Mom, 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 because, the mom was doing 100 other things and just kept saying, Mom, Mom. And this child, Mom had died and she was like, I can't hear Mom one more time. And she had a complete meltdown in the middle of the store. They had to leave. And again, it was sort of viewed as this bad behavior because she was also little, she couldn't express it. And so it took a minute to get to that. But yeah, in public, that is really hard because, again, we go back to that self-esteem. You're already feeling like you're not doing a good job. And then all of a sudden in public, you have so many eyes looking at you. You feel like you're being judged and those kinds of things. Yeah. Any other helpful tips or things that you want to say about supporting a child with a grief burst?
I would just say to parents and guardians, if you're not as patient as you want to be, and there are times you're human, you're not always going to be able to do all this perfectly, we have a little saying, no guilt trips allowed. Just sort of try to remember that, and you can even go to your child once you're both calm and say, I probably didn't handle it the best way that I should have, and can we talk about it now? Because I do want to understand what your feelings are. So it's okay to go back and have the conversation, and even if it's the next day.
And I love that. I think that's a really big lesson for us to learn as caregivers is it's okay for us to tell kids that we got something wrong and I really messed up and I should not have responded like that. And we can say, I'm grieving too, and I blew that. I'd like to try that again, and let's talk about that. And I see, and I think this is what you're saying too, the goodness that is for a family is just huge. Just we're being open and we're honest. And again, it goes back to what we said a minute ago about being that role model. Wow, you just admitted that you get things wrong sometimes or that you overreact. Well, that's going to help your child because guess what? They're going to get things wrong. And it just puts everybody in a better place of honesty. And we're trying this grief thing is new to all of us, and we all have big feelings.
Yeah. And, I've had kids who will come back after they learn about this and then they see their parents have a grief burst. And sometimes they point it out to the parent. I know what's going on with you right now. And it helps them too, because sometimes they might think, well, something I did.
Right.
And it has more to do with the parent's grief than the child. And it helps them to know that I'm not doing something wrong.
And it just goes back to what is so important to us is, one, we have to know that we're grieving. We have to know what that means. And then we have to understand what a grief burst is, because we're all going to have them. And then how do we react and we respond? And like you said, sometimes that reaction and response needs to be when we're all calm. It could be hours to a day later, and that we can just restart together as a family.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Barbara, so much for being here. I think this is such an important topic. And to our listeners, we hope that this gives you some practical things that you can say, also a little permission to not be so hard on yourself. No guilt trips allowed for sure. And help you with your grief as it comes in waves that we say, or grief burst here, and also to help your children as they experience these as well. So thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you.
Grief does heal. Let me say that again. Grief does heal. But like we've said, grief demands attention and care. It also needs support and patience. Remember that your grief is a reflection of your love. You are not alone. The world is full of many grievers like you. You can learn more about us at www.baptistgriefcenters.org. You can check out our YouTube channel, Baptist Centers for Good Grief. You can check out our podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, know that you can reach out and let us know if there's a topic that you're interested in learning more about. You're welcome to email me at angela.kelly@bmhcc.org. That's angela.kelly@bmhcc.org. And remember, grief is real, big, better shared. We'll talk soon.